So I'm going to try to discuss this. This was a 70-year-old patient. He had a fall. He just had a fall at home, fell off, and he developed quadriparesis. No previous history, had not visited the doctor. The neurologist asked me to have a look at him. There was a whiplash injury with a epidural hematoma. That was a CT. He had a OPLL and had to be counseled about the option of surgery. He had just got one limb movement. The rest were off, and he had paradoxical breathing, phrenic nerve involvement, because of the high cord injury. So we had to counsel them about surgery and the fact that he may not recover and that he might be on a ventilator long term. So the relatives did sort of agree for surgery, and the patient was still understanding what was being said. He gave consent himself, though he could not sign. And the patient had a laminectomy. After the surgery, the patient was electively kept on the ventilator. Initially, the pressure support, then after that, the synchronized intermittent mechanical ventilation, the CPAP. And then after maybe 5 days, he was put on a T-piece, and then subsequently non-invasive ventilation with a mask. It was possible to extubate him. He was treated with aggressive therapy. Remember the role of TED stockings and Clexane, for these patients. And that was him 6 months follow-up. He had some neurologic recovery, but he still required support. So there are, well-defined objective criteria for weaning off the ventilator. There are subjective assessments, objective measurements, and obviously, looking at the PO2. And there are also criteria for, successful spontaneous breathing trials, to understand if the patient is tolerating the TPs well, or, is he going to be successfully extubated. Also, you can have a failure of weaning, and there is a classification for even describing this, And of course, a patient who requires prolonged ventilation will require a tracheostomy. So this was another 75-year-old gentleman. He came with, on a wheelchair. He had severe myelopathy. And you go back to all the discussion which Dr. Dalvi had, about never using a kerosene, etc. in these cases, because that is going to be a short deficit, So I think it's also important that you are self-critical. Self-critical, it's very easy to be saying that, I had something else or it's the positioning, but you as a surgeon have to take the responsibility, because if you're asking the patient to undergo the surgery, the responsibility does lie with you. So this patient, did have surgery. Again, reiterating that you should always use a burr in these cases, not use a kerosene. Use monitoring. So I use monitoring for all patients with cervical pathology. I don't do any surgery for cervical surgery without monitoring, because even a positioning related problem will be picked up. And you have to see the cervical alignment, that there is adequate lordosis. And then this patient did have a cervical laminectomy. You can see that there is starting to show some kyphosis developing. Okay, but the patient was extubated. He was extubated early, and he had some recovery neurologically. So now this is a 5-year-old child with Morquio syndrome. The child presented with actually quadriparesis, bed-bound child, and that was his MRI. He had syringobulbia and changes in the upper cervical spine. So we had to talk to them about surgery, and counsel them about the risks. And we tried to do all the preoperative planning. We looked at everything we could do, but unfortunately we could not get the screws in because the bone was very dysplastic, so we had to use a hook. And we did occipital cervical fixation, and then the hook migrated. When we tightened, there was a migration of the hook, and you can see that the hook is in on the CT scan, which was done immediate post-op, because the child woke up with dense deficit, worse than pre-op. And we took him back in the night. The same night we took him back for surgery. He was on ventilator, prolonged, could not get extubated, had to have a tracheostomy, had to have rigorous chest PT. He was ventilator dependent. He did not recover. Okay, so it's one of the sort of sad stories in my practice, but I have to honestly share it with you all, because it's important to understand this can happen. So in a spinal cord injury, what are the recommendations? So if it's a high cervical cord, high cervical cord tetraplegia, they require long-term ventilatory support, and usually you need a tracheostomy. If it's a low cervical cord tetraplegia, then usually the ventilatory support will be for a shorter duration of time, and you can eventually wean them off the ventilator. And for patients who you cannot wean off the ventilator, they usually require a non-invasive ventilation. Remember that the phrenic nerve is supplying the diaphragm. So if the phrenic nerve is involved, then the diaphragm will be involved. Now, general respiratory care, you have to remember that in these patients with spinal cord injury, they are at risk of developing pneumonia. So, it's aggressive chest PT is important, assisted coughing, and vaccination. So, remember, vaccination against influenza and pneumococcus is important. Respiratory complications like dyspnea and sleep disordered breathing patients will be prone for this. Venous thromboembolism is very common in patients with deficit. So, it's important to use low molecular weight heparin. And if there is a contraindication, then to use mechanical prophylaxis with compression stockings or calf pump. Now you have to keep the therapy on for at least 8 to 12 weeks. Okay. Now this is a 6-year-old girl. She actually had a Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. This was a curve, and she underwent growth rod surgery. Now after the surgery, she could not get extubated. She had severe hypotension. We did a 2D echo to see if there's any bleeding, any sort of bleeding, because these patients are prone for that. And we could not wean her. We asked the pediatric surgery people to have a look, and basically the patient had developed pneumothorax, bilateral pneumothorax, and needed ICD insertion. So you can see after the ICD insertion, the expansion happened. Okay. And eventually the child was weaned successfully and even underwent growth rod surgery subsequently. I'll need 1 minute. Yeah. This is how the child looks post-op, and that's her. She's doing well. She's had 2 lengthenings after that. But the ability to pick up something unusual is and think out, not be very focused on what we are doing only. Having good support. Now this is a 6-year-old boy with neurofibromatosis. Had to have stage surgery. So what are the strategies here to prevent post-op ventilator dependency? So one of the things is pre-op PFT assessment, looking at the role of traction, chest physical therapy pre-surgery, using spirometer, etc., asking the parents. And of course to stage the surgery. Now a small child is not going to tolerate blood loss. Like 500 ml in a small child is equivalent to 1 liter in an adult. So you have to understand that. You also have to understand that you may not be able to do a thoracoplasty in all these patients, because if they have significant restrictive disease, they will become, difficult to wean off the ventilator. So in this child, we did an anterior surgery first stage, then we put the child on halo gravity, and then second stage we looked at, doing the posterior fusion after 3 weeks. Now this is another child who was operated like on Friday. Actually, she was kept in the ward for preoperative halo traction. That's the pre-op X-ray there, and that's the PFT, and that's the after the traction. You can see the correction after the traction, and it's a significant correction. You have to only keep the child in the ward for 6 weeks. And then that's the post-op correction. I mean, this child is still actually right now out, getting just out of the ICU today. So, you can see that a good correction is possible to obtain with halo traction pre-op. It also helps the PFT and reduces the need of ventilator. So when we look at the evaluation of perioperative pulmonary risk, pulmonary complications are an important source of morbidity, and they represent an extension of the normal changes which occur in the lung during anesthesia. There are, of course, patient-related factors. So older patients, obese patients, COPD patients, ASA grade 2 and above, patients with apnea, sleep apnea, cigarette use. So always ask patients to stop smoking. All patients with pulmonary hypertension, and a low baseline oxygen saturation. So these are the patients, who may have a small surgery but will end up with problems just because of their medical comorbidities. And then there are the procedure-related complications, which are surgical site, so obviously cervical, neurosurgical procedures, front back surgeries, duration of the surgery, any surgery lasting more than 3 hours, and of course the type of anesthesia. Now general anesthesia leads to a higher risk, so you may decide to use regional anesthesia for a lumbar spine surgery if it's possible to coordinate that with the anesthesia team. I mean, we have done a few cases like that, for the high risk patients. Of course, using pancuronium, using neuromonitoring also sort of sometimes can affect, because you're giving large doses of the sedatives, the propofol, etc. And of course, patients who undergo emergency surgery. Now, post-op pulmonary complications are a major cause of morbidity and mortality. And, we are looking for atelectasis, pneumonia, ARDS, and pulmonary aspiration. So the take-home message, really important to have a good preoperative assessment, with the physician and the anesthesiologist. Risk stratification of each patient, counseling, preoperative counseling, as has been talked about, anticipating problems, safe and timely execution of the procedure, with care, like Dr. Dalvi very nicely mentioned. If it was your own, how would you want it to be done? Post-operative ICU and medical care and appropriate facilities and backup. Don't operate very complex cases in small setups. It's probably not a good idea. Understanding, how to wean off, and support for the family. Support for the family if something goes wrong. because you have to have the courage of your convictions once you have made a decision to back it up and to ensure the safety of the patient. Thank you very much.